The Everything Sequel podcast is brought to you by Brew Bar and the Vegas Beer Guys.
The Everything Sequel podcast contains explicit language, and I will not go to my room. Hello and welcome to the Everything Sequel podcast. This is the Rambo edition. Today, we're just talking Rambo, the 2008 film. My name is Michael Shantz of the How Dare You Awards. Joining me, of course, your friend and mine, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Hit me, Tom.
Gotta be better than looking at the arse end of a snake.
That guy's a bit extra in this movie, no?
I have a sneaking suspicion that Sylvester Stallone, prior to filming, had just watched the Guy Ritchie box set. Because in this movie, there are cursing cockneys and people being fed to pigs.
Right.
Both hallmarks
of
Guy Ritchie's movie. And I think historically it would just about work. I think that we're back at a time when people still cared about Guy Ritchie. Yeah, Graham McTavish, I do enjoy his performance in this, and I think he actually...
Oh, I do too. I think it's delicious.
He's definitely
extra. But he's
extra,
so extra.
They use it in a character arc that's quite satisfying, and it's an unusually... I guess it's redemption for the mercenary character in some senses.
You think?
A little bit, yeah. I think because that compared to how they are in First Blood Part 2.
Okay.
You know, they're like all of the A-Team's villains.
They're evil.
Yeah. And here even Graham McTavish gets a little bit of redemption. He uses his fuckheadery to get people out of a jam.
Yeah.
So, I think there's as a kind of callback to Rambo having to work with fake soldiers, but also that the fake soldiers have got a chance of becoming real soldiers if they listen to Rambo.
Well, yeah, and that's so it's funny you say that because, you know, the last movie doesn't really have it at all, and this movie doesn't really either. It barely alludes to, I don't know. In the first, there's always something very satisfying in the original First Blood and Rambo First Blood Part 2 when characters discover exactly how badass Rambo is. You know?
We have to wait a long time for that in this movie.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, in the first movie, you just have Troutman showing up and, you know, and then in the second movie, what you call hell, he calls home. And,
yeah,
you know, all of those things are really delicious. And these last two movies, that's for the most part absent. Really, the only thing you have is when he bow and arrows people because he ended up following them from the boat when when he's been strictly told, you're the boatman, you stay with the boat.
Yeah.
And he shows up, and when they see like how good he is with the bow, they're like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" You know. So they actually start listening to him a bit, but you don't have that moment where they learn that he's, you know, Medal of Honor winner and all that stuff, which I always find delightful in the other movies.
Then again, yeah, that never comes up in either of the two movies,
right?
That we have left to do in the franchise. That he, like, no one ever finds out who he is other than, you know, his name.
Right.
And there's actually a wonderful moment in this movie where you feel like they're about to give you, like, an exposition dump of the Rambo timeline. You know, when Julie Benz as Sarah asks Rambo, like, well, if you were in Vietnam and now you're in Thailand, but you went home, why are you here now?
Yeah.
And he says, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And I love
Just
that. That is the script
just
flat
one
out
line,
refusing
2 words. It's complicated.
to get bogged down in this frankly nonsensical history of Rambo.
Right. Because in the second movie, you have another boat ride in which he declares, I kind of started my own war, the kind of war you don't win.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, both these movies are interesting in what they do with backstory, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm grateful in this movie that it's more about, we're not drawing too much attention to the backstory, but we're also not adding anything new. Whereas Last Blood, as you know, that we'll get to, is full of new information that is not explained in a coherent way.
Right. At all.
So I like where this movie is sandwiched between those two poles of thinking.
Yeah, agreed. And so, I mean, look, we ranked our movies the same, but this is the only movie where we differed, where you said it was a good movie and I said it was a bad movie.
Yeah.
But ask me on any given day, and I might give this movie a pass and say it's a good movie. If it's not a good movie, it is good adjacent. It's really close to a good movie. But as we have spoken to before, and I guess first I should say, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the 2008 film Rambo.
Which is not the first movie featuring Rambo, as the
Right.
title would suggest.
It's
Because
very strange to me.
Interestingly, if you go on IMDb, this is about the 4th down the list when you put in Rambo into the search engine. Which is interesting to me, and the thing that's knocking it off is the fact that First Blood is called First Blood, aka Rambo.
Oh,
So
man. God.
that First Blood has kind of been unofficially renamed Rambo.
Renamed Rambo.
Which makes this choice of title even more curious
Even more
than it already
strange.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
I mean,
also, so this is the only movie in the series directed by Sylvester Stallone himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you talked about this movie being good adjacent. I'm taking it from a slightly different perspective, which is that over the 2 viewings I've had of this movie, it more or less comes out as a good movie. But in a previous episode, you told the listeners how you'd grown up with Stallone movies.
Sure.
And that's not the case for me. I didn't grow up with these movies. I've seen pretty much all of Stallone's work in the last 10 years of my life.
Oh, interesting.
Which is partly why I'm not as embarrassed about some of the lesser movies. Because it really is a choice. I'm not doing it out of peer pressure. I'm not because, blowing shit up in movies is cool as I would be as a teenager.
Right.
Yeah, I'm really committing to wanting to watch these as an adult who has 0 time to do it.
Well, and for a series that took so much time off between the 3rd and this 4th movie, because we talked in the introductory episode about these movies getting progressively worse, and we ourselves, in our rankings, rank them that way.
Yeah.
In order. But at the same time, with a budget of $50 million and an opening weekend of $18.2 million, didn't quite make its money back in the USA, $42.7, but cumulatively worldwide, $113 million. So there was still an audience for Rambo.
Because I wasn't really interested in seeing Stallone movies in 2008. I was still living in Britain at the time, and I remember the British press laying into this movie.
Oh,
to the
really?
point where it was really off-putting, even not being interested in Stallone. So I was never going to see it when it came out, and I only saw it for the first time about 18 months ago in anticipation of Last Blood. I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything before I went into Last Blood. It turns out the last 14 seconds of this movie would have been fine.
Yeah.
but
Right.
but nonetheless, that's why I did it. And like 18 months ago when I first saw this movie, I was, pun intended, blown away.
Okay.
I thought it was excellent. I saw it in line with the Stallone project of going back to his franchises that had kind of lost their way, and trying to craft a movie that satisfyingly winds up the franchise in the same way he did with Rocky
Right.
Balboa.
And I felt
got
like
that.
I do remember upon my first viewing of this movie, I thought two things. I did think that was much better than I thought it was going to be.
Right.
And I did think it did wrap up the series, which it actually didn't end up doing, but we'll get to that next episode. But
Yeah.
he insisted on coming back.
Right. And
But I also, I view the two series differently. I did think, like, Rocky had clearly lost its way by the time you got to Rocky 5, and so I understood his wanting to do Rocky Balboa. But like we've already spoken to, as ridiculous as Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 3 are, I didn't feel like the franchise had lost its way. I just thought it went in a different direction, and I revel in that direction.
yeah, I mean, I absolutely, just listen back to the past couple of episodes. I completely agree, but I mean, certainly the perception, and we've talked about this before, of like drifting away from First Blood, which is the kind of respectable end of this
Right.
franchise.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And clearly, in the way that this movie is made, Stallone is conscious of a kind of reset to
Absolutely.
very much tonally. Also, well, not necessarily stylistically, but certainly tonally, he's wanting to. I mean, for the first sort of 20, 30 minutes of this movie, every single scene is a counterpoint to the opening of Rambo 3.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, it's point counterpoint.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, the way this movie, first of all, it starts in exactly the same way as Rambo 3 begins. But tonally, visually, in terms of characterization, could not be
I was just
different.
going to say, even for the character himself,
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's different.
But it's just to go back to like my original viewing, I thought Stallone was excellent both in front of and behind the camera. His performance really reminded me, whether it was a deliberate nod or not, to Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot of that kind of characterization into it. I think he makes some really interesting directorial choices that more or less work.
I'll agree with that. I think directorially it's a little uneven,
Yes.
but overall, I don't know if struck is the right word, but I thought he took the series in a different way and to a different place, and a place that was at least interesting.
Yeah.
Especially in the sense of its heavy violence.
Right. Yeah, and not allowing you to enjoy the violence in the same way
Right.
that you did
And that's the thing
Rambo
is
3.
is in those two previous movies you get to revel in the violence, and that's absent from this movie. And so on my first viewing, the other overarching thing that I read into it was this movie's no fun.
Mm-hmm.
I would have said it's a pretty good movie, but it's just joyless, and in that way I didn't enjoy it as much as the other movies. But I could see what he was going for, and I think I spoke to this in our introductory episode. For what he was going for, I do think it's successful.
Yeah, and that's why, for exactly those
But
reasons,
I missed the joy.
exactly those reasons, rewatching this is it's such a grim movie that it's not enjoyable to rewatch in the same way that the previous two sequels
Right,
are.
right.
And so, on second viewing, I started to the flaws came across more strongly this time.
Yeah.
And I completely overlooked what I think is central to this movie, which is the fact that it's a Christ allegory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's just this sort of general veil of white privilege around it that I found very hard to take upon this viewing.
Yeah.
But I think the movie's problems don't discount its achievements for me. I think that's the best way of putting it. But it really is splitting the difference between two viewings, and this is not a movie I can see myself going back to anytime soon.
Right, and that's the other thing is you're not going to rewatch this sequel. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I'd enjoy rewatching it because I was so impressed by it the first time, but it's like a limited window of where you can feel that way.
Well, and so let me ask you this, because you had spoken to the central, guest starring the war in Burma is this movie.
Right.
And you had spoken to how conscious a choice that was for Stallone himself in writing it.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, well, wait till we get there. I've got some information for you because, over many years, he had been planning this sequel, and whatever got in the way, and it took as long as it did. So possible villains for this movie included right-wing militia, white supremacists, terrorists, international drug dealers, meth dealers, biker gangs, cartels, human traffickers, and sex slavers. So this movie...
Spoiler alert, we get to at least two of those.
Yeah, I was just going to say, wait for one more movie, and clearly it was still on his mind.
I think there was probably like 3 or 4 rings drawn around cartel in that list.
Right. Oh my goodness.
So the idea, that was my big question upon watching this movie is like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was it Burmese genocide, or was it making a Rambo movie? And clearly it was making a Rambo movie. It was
making a Rambo movie first, and then at a certain point when he started learning about Burma, he decided this needs some attention.
I mean, that's interesting for a couple of reasons. The first being that even asking that question tells me that he's been successful, because I think of this as a movie about Burmese genocide. By even asking that question, I don't just think it's a Rambo movie.
That's the other thing, right? Exactly.
But secondly, I think what that makes me think is that maybe the tone of this was very, very different before Burma entered into the picture.
Yeah, maybe that's a possibility.
That the decision not to have fun with things might have been specifically related to
born out of deciding to go to Burma.
Well, what was Stallone was... I mean, there's an interesting line early on in this movie, which is still in the sort of war exposition part of the movie, because I mean, this is a war, or as they say, a genocide that people know less about than maybe Vietnam or Afghanistan, and that's very conscious in the movie, that they provide as much information and facts about the war
up front
as
possible. Yeah.
But when the Paul Schultz character, who's a Christian missionary, says it's really more of a genocide than a war, I mean, that feels like, something that came out of Stallone's research. It's like, we should be calling it a genocide. I'll put that in the script somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how, tonally, how many decisions are a direct result of him saying, we can't, retrofit the sort of cartoonish Russians and the sort of formula of the Vietnam War movie
into
or,
we can't wedge it into
the
that
kind of like Afghanistan Western which you
Mhm.
get in the last movie onto this. It just
Yeah.
doesn't like they don't dovetail enough.
That would be interesting to know the process,
Yeah.
you know, in how this movie evolved into what and how what you're saying. But look, let's take a break, and then
We not even started.
I know we've barely started. We're gonna take a break, but when we come back, we'll get deep into Rambo from 2008. I desperately want to call it Rambo 4. We'll be right back.
I like to think I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had one, maybe two craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beer. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.
And we're back. Tom and I are here discussing the 2008 film Rambo, directed by the man himself, Sylvester Stallone. I want to ask you this, Tom. The ultimate reason I went with this is a bad movie has to do with the choices that the character Rambo himself makes. We've talked about in the previous film and this film how they're sort of carbon copies of each other. You know, they start at the same place. He's in the same place.
Yeah.
Sort of mentally. He's in a better place than he's probably ever been. In the third movie, he's working with monks. In this movie, he's catching cobras and able
Still
to keep his
fish to
darker...
monks.
Yeah, right.
He's really
But
moved
he's
on. He's
able
not
to
giving
kinda
them money,
keep
he's
his-
giving them fish.
Yeah, exactly. And he's able to keep the dark clouds out of his mind by doing whatever it is he's doing for a living.
I won't step too much on your question, but I just want to say I think one of the reasons I like this movie so much is that those dark clouds seem more present here than the Zen version of Rambo we see at the beginning of Rocky 3, and that's why I like it.
That's more emotionally honest.
Yeah, for sure.
Which interests me, but my problem is that, you know, the Christians show up.
Yes,
so
that is when the problems start. Yes.
Right. So you have Julie Benz show up and he what's that other actor's name?
Paul Schultz
Yes.
from The Sopranos and Nurse Jackie.
Correct. Michael Burnett, I think the character's name.
Yeah, wonderful actor.
So they ask him to help them go up the river, and it's a flat no.
Yeah.
Which, for where the character is, makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then he has, you know, Julie Benz shows up just sitting on his boat. We have he's sleeping in his hammock flashback scene, so we have a bit of an idea that at least in dream state, Rambo's past is still kind of haunting him.
Yeah.
And he wakes up and has a conversation with her. That conversation didn't feel like enough for me to convince me that this man would make the choice to take these people upriver.
Yeah.
So to me, it renders the whole movie a bit suspect. Like, that's the weakest part of the movie to me.
I agree.
It makes more sense to go get Troutman because of their history.
I mean, with the proviso that they give themselves an out by that he again hiring him for a job that he's severely underqualified for. At that point,
Right.
he is just he is just driving them there essentially.
Right. There and
He's just
yeah.
he's just a water Uber.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that I'm glad that they at least give him a reason to go back in, which is extraction.
Yeah, and that does make more sense to me, because he is who he is. I guess let me put it this way. Their conversation was enough for me to be convinced that he would go back to try and help them, but not enough for me to convince me that he would take them in the first place.
Interesting.
And if he didn't take him in the first place, he might not have ever been visited by Ken Howard, former president of SAG, to convince him to go get them.
Is that who that is, really?
Yeah. Do you know Ken Howard? Have you heard of the show The White Shadow?
Yes. Oh, is that who it is?
Yeah.
What an interesting casting choice for such a non-role.
Right. And White. So he's barely in the movie, but you got
and
Ken
he is
Howard,
a shadow.
And he's just in shadow. And then, of course, The White Shadow also starred, or at least one of the kids on the basketball team was Tim Van Patten, who's, he directed probably more episodes of The Sopranos
That's
than
right.
anybody else. Yeah.
Interesting. I actually buy that he would take them in the first place more than I know he hates mercenaries, but I didn't buy that. See, I think here's the couple of things that really hurt the plausibility of this movie. Like this time, reading it as a kind of reading it as he is Christ, which is not too big a leap given that he's both director and star of this movie.
Star, right?
It makes sense that the Christians find him at his lowest. He's completely jaded. He says no one can change anything.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the beginning of his kind of like redemption arc that ends with him sacrificing himself for the good of other people. Like an entirely selfless act. So it's the beginning of that storyline.
Yeah, except he doesn't.
Only works symbolically.
It's not like he dies.
Well, he should have done.
Right.
To complete the allegory, but Stallone's not going to kill off one of his major characters. As we find out in the next movie, he is literally not prepared to do that.
Yeah.
So I like it. It's a storyline that works symbolically, but not in any kind of terms that you can convincingly write in a script.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big problem here. That holds all that back. Also, I mean, his choices again. This thing that came out to me this time. I don't know why I didn't see it the first time. Maybe because I'm watching it in 2021 when I feel a little more engaged.
There's been a few shit storms
of white privilege. But
right.
He's making decisions based on the fact that there's danger for a white woman.
Right.
Like that is the kind of.
But that's my other problem with this movie is it's so inherently dishonest, and I'm not advocating for the rape of Julie Benz, but
definitely not.
The idea that no harm comes to this woman in the however long they have her is patently absurd.
And that's why it's interesting to see this and Last Blood back to back, because you realize that the only reason she's being spared is because she's white. Because spoiler alert in the next movie, if you're a brown, if you're a woman of color, you do not get the same privilege in this movie.
But here's the thing that I find really interesting, juxtaposing these two last movies together. Because no harm befalls the white woman, which
Yeah.
I thought, it's just, like I said, it's absurd that this white woman is spared. But then I was so offended in the next movie when that happened. I was just like, she dies?
Yeah.
You know?
But it's the double standard. It's that, you know, we're willing to, you know, we're willing to sanitize
Right.
if they're a certain color. I mean, that's it.
Right.
That's like
Yeah.
the only conclusion you can draw. It's also extremely, you know, the homophobic element of the main reason why she doesn't get raped is because the general is gay,
Is gay, right.
which is a sincerely troubling moment.
Very.
Which makes
And this
him,
is
which
neither
makes
here
him,
nor
you know, the
there,
oldest
but I think
archetype, the gay villain.
Say it
Yeah.
again? Sorry.
Is the oldest archetype in the book of the gay villain, which just comes
Right,
out of
yeah.
nowhere and is entirely a reason for Julie Benz not to get raped and for us to keep this veneer of...
But the other problem with that too is her being caught and at the village wherever they take her is also juxtaposed with scenes of forcing women to dance for the hundreds of soldiers
Right.
who are all rabid enough that they can't even survive the dance before they're setting off flares and gas and all going like rape crazy.
Not to mention, you know, what's done to Native women throughout this movie in terms of the violence exacted
Yeah.
on them that we see, you know, viscerally, explicitly, graphically throughout the movie. It is just it's a pure double standard that for all of, I think, Stallone's genuine desire to show the suffering that war has caused, and maybe kind of redress the fact that he's glorified war so much in this franchise, which I think is definitely at play here.
But that's what's
He's
so
doing
weird
it in
to me.
He's doing it in a way that is still very duplicitous and
Right, exactly. It's still duplicitous and it's still offensive.
and you know, and then it becomes about power because we commented that it's equally weird that nothing happens to Troutman until Rambo. I'm so Rocky centered with this one because I see so many comparisons. The fact that with these two movies, anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But you know, because he's like he's a middle-aged man. It's like you feel that that's sort of the reason they're letting him off the hook, and because he's a beloved character.
Mm-hmm.
But here it's so blatant that it's about, you know, it's about rescuing the white heroine.
Well, yeah, it's just white privilege, like rearing its head, ugly.
Yeah.
So that's the, you know, and those are the things that I found distasteful enough that I thought, I get everything he's trying to do, but because he missed this mark, I can't say this movie's a good movie. Because it undercuts everything else he was trying to do.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair enough.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
I can't disagree with that at all.
I'm interested in your thought about this too, because there's this scene, you know, they've been kidnapped and the mercenaries are gonna go. I think I have this right. The mercenaries are gonna go upriver and he's gonna drive them.
Yeah, he's still just a sailor at this point.
Yeah, right? Like everybody on that boat is just calling him the boatman.
Yeah.
Which
You're the boatman, you
if
stay
this
with the
movie
boat.
was tonally going for any kind of humor ever, could have been used for actual humor. But since he's not going for that, it's, you know,
Yeah.
mirthless. But there's this moment, and I think it's when he's talking to them, or I can't remember, maybe it's when he's making his own huge knife. I forget. But he says, at one point he says, and he's kind of whispering it. He says, you've killed for yourself. When you're pushed, killing is as easy as breathing. Mm-hmm. And it feels like Troutman won.
Yeah.
It feels like Troutman got what he wanted Rambo to give into from Rambo 3.
Yeah.
Which also doesn't make sense for me because, like we have spoken to before, he seemed in a better place now, trying to keep his demons at bay by doing this. But it's just like I guess this is one of the things I do find interesting about the character is the darkness is always right underneath the surface for this guy.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
But it seems so weird that it was like not below the surface. It was above the surface.
Well,
even though he had carved out a little piece of sanity for himself.
But I don't see it that way at all in this movie. I think that's totally reading it through the prism of Rambo 3. I think here in performance they're leaning into it. Mm-hmm. The first time anyone approaches him, he just he says, "Fuck off, okay?"
Yeah.
And it's just like he is. It's as you said. It's like a more emotionally honest version of where he mentally would be. And
yeah.
to sort of, I mean, we're not really talking about this movie chronologically, but at the start of this movie, we have an astoundingly long sequence where he catches a cobra. And then takes it to a man. And
who tells him,
"We don't want
pythons.
any
I
more
have enough
cobras.
Fucking cobras."
We have no cobras today.
He's too good at catching cobras. Yeah.
And like it's scene by scene. The opening of Rambo 3 gives fish to monks on the way. Except there's no spectacle, there's no glamour, there's no agency. It's like it's what this would actually be like to live through. Mm-hmm. Incredibly unsatisfying. There's this one guy with a mic and about 3 people watching him, and he's just going, "Cobra, cobra, cobra, it's a cobra. Look, it goes left, it goes right, it's a cobra." And I think starting in that place, I feel like it's less of a drop off when he just says "fuck it" and becomes Rambo than this idea that he's living in the temple, he's living a meditative life in Rambo 3.
Well, because that's something.
And then in the next one, all this nonsense with his PTSD medication. That's the kind of narrative leash here. Really, here he doesn't have anything to lose because his life otherwise is so just day-to-day menial tasks, which is what it was in Rambo 3, but they represented it as if he was, Conan the Barbarian.
Zen. It was more Zen, It was for like peaceful mind.
Yeah. I feel like it makes sense again within the context of this movie, but not reading across any of these movies.
Let me ask you this.
Which is Rambo in a nutshell.
Right. Speaking more chronologically, because we have been jumping around, so we have them ask him, and then they get caught, and so now he's, or actually before they get caught, when he's actually taking them upriver, and they try to get past the pirates kind of cove, and those guys come out, and he's got to kill everybody, right? In order to save the white people, he has to kill everybody, which the white people hate. They're like to the point where Paul Schultz says, "I'm going to have to report this." Report it.
Right.
But is that kind of what's the design of that scene to you? Is that to kind of throw it in the white people's face of how little they understand?
That's the way it comes off. I don't think that's the intention of the scene.
Okay.
I think for me the intention of the scene is to do what this movie's doing on so many levels, which is to sort of reproach Rambo's approach to the world.
Yeah, so to me is it this idea of these missionaries have a purpose for the world that they want the world to be.
Right.
And they have to be reminded of the world as it is.
And this is where,
at least from Rambo's point of view.
Right. Well, Rambo's point of view is I think what makes this the biggest difference between this and Last Blood to me is Last Blood. Everything we see endorses Rambo's viewpoint of the world, but still within here there are a few aspects of reality that contradict how he sees life.
Right. True.
We're still, so the fact that once they get to the the village and set up their camp, which is essentially like a field hospital for injured women and children, we actually see them, doing necessary good work. And, that directly contradicts what Rambo is saying. You can't change anything.
Right.
Not, it's like, well, yeah, if you take someone with medical training to a war-torn village, they might be able to save a few lives.
They might be able to,
That's basically
to actually help some, right?
Yeah, so, but in that scene, it's very confusing, I agree, because the Paul Schultz character is kind of, he's, the reality of what we're seeing is that Rambo is right. It's like, they're gonna kill everyone and rape her.
Yeah.
So if I don't kill them, that's gonna happen. So when Paul Schultz speaks
Rambo,
up and says,
that's not gonna happen.
And when Paul Schultz speaks up and says, you can't just taking a life is. I think he says taking a life is never right.
Right.
Which I think is meant.
He does say that.
Is meant to be one of those kind of counterpoints to Rambo's way of thinking. The problem is the reality in the scene is that Rambo is right, and he just looks naive and very middle American and out of his depth.
Well, and I won't speak to it yet, but that character has a real arc, so by the end of the movie.
Yeah. And that's, so I thought that, it's one of the moments where I thought the movie's being kind of disingenuous because it wants to call Rambo's worldview out, but it's secretly, in the way that the movie...
But it's secretly endorsing that worldview.
Yeah, it's secretly siding with it.
Yeah.
And also this sort of, just this general kind of idea that a lot of conservatives will, throw at you, which is that, like, not killing people who are evil is a weird way to live your life. I mean, that's what a lot of conservatives think.
Right.
It's like, hey, this guy's a serial killer. Why wouldn't you execute him? That's like not being able to think around that way. And that's partly being critiqued here, but not in a way that comes out in the movie. But there is at least, there's at least moments where there's a sense that, Rambo's idea of how to do things has got to change a little bit. Although, again, there's large parts of the movies where, we just see scenes of carnage and slaughter. And partly I'm thinking that those because we've never seen that, but we've never seen scenes of such slaughter and carnage in Rambo movies that Rambo doesn't, intervene in and make better. But we get a lot of those here. It's like half the movie before Rambo does anything or saves anything. But I don't know if that's them saying, look, what this situation needs is a Rambo. I know that's how a lot of the press interpreted his take on Burma. It's like you need one, you need one American man. And all this will change, which is kind of Rocky IV in a nutshell. It's like you can end the Cold War just by providing a good example. But I don't know. I mean, it's a bit more complex than that here, but at times it falls back on that kind of thinking.
Well, I think that's the overall thing, is that this movie isn't it's not moving deftly enough to be able to show both sides of that argument well.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess so.
Right.
At
Listen, we're going to take
is.
another break. Well, Maybe that's why you like it, and or why you say good and I say bad. But we're going to take another break, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up talking about Rambo right after this.
If you're anything like me, you spend the majority of the day wondering whether you want coffee, beer, or wine. Whichever way you fall, Brew Bar has you covered. Located in the heart of 3rd Avenue Village in glorious downtown Chula Vista, California, which is also my neck of the woods, Brew Bar is a coffee shop, bar, and eatery rolled into one delightful package. Tim and Alex run the place, and let me tell you, listeners, these guys know their coffee. And after you've been in their company, so will you. They turned me on to pour over, and it's literally all I drink now. If for some crazy reason you don't want to try the best coffee in the world, they've got espresso drinks, all kinds of teas, and even coffee cocktails. You heard me? Coffee tails. And we're just getting started. Bottle service on craft beer and wine, alcoholic and caffeinated potions, an all-day food menu with plenty of vegan options. All served up in an atmosphere hip enough to know you're getting the best quality, but not too hip that you feel the need to drive to 7-Eleven and get a bucket of brown swill. Brew Bar. It's the best place to be for beer, wine, coffee, and tea. And if you go, you might even see me.
And we are back. We are here talking about Rambo. The movie we thought would be the last Rambo, but was not. So,
Yeah. that's
I swear, this
incredibly
movie
accurate.
was built to be the last of the series. I was
Yeah, I
so
mean, the
astonished when I
ending-
saw, previews for Last Blood.
Oh, we'll talk about that in the next episode because I have a lot to say about how that movie is misrepresented by the trailer they put out. But here, I mean, we're not, when we say full circle, we're not talking figuratively. This movie literally ends with the first shot of First Blood.
Yeah.
To all intents and purposes.
Just a different farm.
Yeah, just...
Home farm.
Yeah. The farm we wish we never knew about.
Yeah.
But we're not going chronologically, but we're not quite there yet.
No, yeah. Well, so let me ask you this. Do you think is it clear in this movie whether or not these team of mercenaries have ever met or worked together before?
Oh, good question.
Because there's not a lot of rah-rah team between these guys. They're not exactly working well together.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought past, the
movie feels to me
callback.
like they were hired individually and it all had to come together.
Yeah, absolutely. This feels like, this feels like it doesn't feel like they're an ensemble.
Yeah, right. But and I guess the reason I ask is because you have this sort of hero's moment after Rambo kind of proves to them what he can do, but because we're seeing the Burmese army or whatever it is, terrorizing people with the mines in the rice paddy game for a second time,
Right.
and so he kills 5 or 6 people.
Everything in this movie happens twice.
Yeah, exactly. So, and he has this moment where he says, "This is who we are. Live for nothing or die for something." But because this group is this group, I just wanted one of them to say, "What? I'm not dying for it." Like, they don't seem like they're going to die for something, I guess is my overall
Well, isn't that
point.
isn't that Graham McTavish's basic message?
Yeah.
Is that I'm in this for the money.
Right.
There's only really one of them, Matthew Marsden, who...
Marsden, yeah.
has the ability
Schoolboy.
to Schoolboy has the ability to like rise to the challenge.
Yeah.
To the point where I almost thought they were kind of grooming a new Rambo at one point.
Oh, really?
There's a kind of moment where I don't know how that
I
would
think I
work
know Stallone in his
narratively.
movies well enough to think, no, that'll never happen.
Yeah, but when he when he explodes the enemy's heads instead of Rambo,
Right.
I thought, are they passing the gauntlet here? Yeah, it's interesting. I'd never thought about. I think it's just another way in which they are soldiers in name only,
Right.
because it's like they're not a unit. You know, they're in this for profit. I mean, they're introduced in such a way by Stallone saying mercenaries. And that kind of, that's nice because it calls back to Martin Cove and that other dickhead in
The blonde guy.
in First Blood Part 2.
Yeah.
And there's also a nice callback to Murdoch in the fact that Graham McTavish's character is clearly feeling the heat.
Yeah.
Which is like Stallone's way of saying that, this guy's not ready for jungle warfare if he's sweating
Well, and
already.
earlier I was speaking to, it's kind of delicious to like see the moment where other people realize, or even whether it's slowly realizing the extent to which Rambo's a badass. But I do like that moment when they're on the boat and he's like, you could quit with the 1,000-yard stare. I've seen it all before.
Yeah.
And
again,
it's Stallone's choice as an actor is to stare him dead in the eye and then spit off the boat. And I did have the kind of same revel of like, if this guy only fucking knew.
Yeah, it's doing what this movie is doing a lot. It's kind of calling attention to and critiquing a lot of what's been established in the franchise as something cool about Rambo.
Mm-hmm.
Like him staring suddenly becomes this very this cliched thing. Like the Graham McTavish is basically saying, like, I know this is you're just trying to intimidate me and it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of interesting, like, even sort of saying, in the way that Graham McTavish's character arc works out, where basically, as I understand it, he uses his fuckheadery to distract, to distract the villains and save some lives. And Matthew Marsden being, has Rambo-like qualities, but he's got this kind of, as the name would suggest, this kind of innocence and drive that Rambo doesn't have, and passion that Rambo doesn't have, but he listens to Rambo. It's kind of saying, there are other ways of doing this.
Yeah.
I think Rambo really here is like as you said, he doesn't die and he should, but he's kind of playing the role of the sacrificial lamb. It's like, I'll take you guys into the lion's den, and
right,
but I'll sacrifice myself so you can get out.
Well, not just that, yeah.
Which is where I think the Christ crucifixion thing comes in.
Mm-hmm. And he, in the
but
form
the
of
is
him taking
die.
off a bit of her shirt and wrapping his foot around his foot. But I always, every time he does that, where he's letting the dogs chase him, I always think, well, wouldn't the dogs now have two trails? It's not like they're, just because he's wearing a piece of her shirt, they're going to stop smelling Julie Benz.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
But
yeah,
this is sort of it doesn't play exactly,
Yeah. It's like it only works symbolically. Like if you see him as like, I'm gonna
sacrifice.
I'm gonna get on this cross for you. That's how I was reading it. As a tactical maneuver, it's not very advisable.
Right.
And once again, after.
But I like, because even Schoolboy is like, wait, what are you gonna do? And he goes, don't worry, I'll be fine.
And again, he just reverts to bomb arrow, Home Alone shit, bomb arrows, stealing the enemy's equipment and shooting them with it. He's got one move. But there's this sense of like, I got more of a sense that he was in this movie that he was a necessary evil.
Rambo himself, you mean?
Yeah.
Or okay.
And that as soon as he's done the thing that saves the lives of the people who need to survive to save other people's lives, you want him to recede and disappear as quickly as possible. And I think that's what the ending for me is all about of this movie. It's like,
yeah, sure.
It's like the way probably my favorite sequence in the entire film, partly because it's silent, is which doesn't say much. Is the scene of him like standing on the top of a hill looking down on all the people he saved, and there's this quiet acknowledgement.
Well, and all the people he's killed.
That too. There's this quiet acknowledgement that, he needed to intervene at this point with this act of bravado, but, he really is just still an observer. And, he's gonna fade into the background again. And in a lot of ways, he's an incidental character in this movie.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this movie that exists independent of him.
Right.
There's no mission in this movie, which again, it's like the last time we saw that was First Blood, where it's literally about survival and getting through a difficult situation. There's no ultimate mission here that he's on. He's not government sanctioned.
Right.
And like you say, no point, and anyone in the movie knows that he is this badass Green Beret. Like, it never comes up.
Right, exactly.
In any meaningful fashion.
I don't know. I find it a little unsatisfying that I guess his actions speak for themselves though.
Yeah.
By the end of this movie, with him on top of that hill, holding his shoulder, you have to think everybody down below that he just saved is thinking, that guy's a badass.
But there's a couple of, and I think this is where the Mickey Rourke and the wrestler appeal of this movie for me comes through, which is when he first pulls the arrow to, in the classic Rambo moment of him drawing the arrow. His hand shakes. And I'm sort of like whatever level you want to see this on, it's kind of cool because it could just be Stallone's getting old. He probably can't do this without his hand shaking a little bit. So that's kind of cool because I think this movie acknowledges the fact that Stallone is aging and past his best. Like it's not something that they're trying to in any way, it's not like the late Roger Moore Bond films where they're just acting as if he's still 30.
Oh, for those of you that are listening, we're at the 55-minute mark when Tom mentioned the James Bond series.
We nearly got through a whole episode
exchange your money. I hope your bets were placed.
Nearly. I want to keep you all on your toes. I'm trying to duke the odds here. But the sense where that his aging and being past his best and out of his depth is kind of factoring into what's going on. And likewise, when he has that shoulder injury, I'm like, is that a Rambo's injury or is that a Stallone injury that they can't keep off screen? Because of what he's had to do in this movie. And I like that, that there's room to show that kind of that vulnerability without it discrediting the idea of Rambo as an action hero.
I agree with that.
Which is what it does in the next movie.
Completely.
You can't take him seriously as an action hero anymore.
Yeah.
And here they're playing both sides kind of close to the chest, and I
do appreciate that about this movie. Yeah. I completely agree with that.
And that's where we're kind of he has to resort to brute strength as well. Like we see.
Well, and all that's
we
kind
talked
of
about horror in these, like these.
Yeah.
Like, for all we've talked about, how horror centered the past two sequels were. It's in these two movies that it's just a George Romero zombie movie.
right. Well, but to your point about this movie, about the brute strength thing, all of that's evident in even the weapon he creates for himself. He forges a new long blade that is not the knife we've been seeing for 3 Rambo movies. Right?
Right, exactly.
And all of that kind of speaks to the brute strength that you're talking about, and then lends itself towards the extreme violence of the end of this movie, which, I mean, are you on board with that extreme violence?
Well, violence as a whole in this movie is kind of interesting. We didn't mention that the movie begins with a montage of news footage,
Right.
which shows us horrific real-life violence and the effects of that. Followed by a fictional simulation of that, which that's obviously an imbas.
I read a
it must
thing
be a
that
sequel
the
because
guy...
it's 2 cold opens, but but it's also got that Stallone thing that we have here a few times of, the teaser and the montage serve exactly the same narrative purpose. And then he does it again later in the movie. He does a voiceover and a recap montage, also an imbas, of all, in terms of a black and white dream sequence. And again, you could do one of those. It makes the same point. But besides that, violence evolves in this movie to a point where...
Well, to a point where the character that Paul Schultz plays, who was admonishing him and saying killing is never right, ends up killing a man with a rock.
Right.
And that felt very deliberate.
It felt very deliberate. I'm in two minds. I think they're trying to sort of say, I think they're trying to push back on Rambo by saying, look at what you do to the people around you. It's not, when you take these actions in the name of other people, you turn them into monsters because they have to live with your violence. That's what I think they're going for.
I looked at it differently in this movie. This movie felt like this movie was saying something different to me. It felt like this movie was saying that this missionary had to come to Rambo's worldview.
See, I think the problem is that's
arc.
how it comes. I think the problem is that's how it comes out on screen, but I think he's just represented, and maybe this is Paul Schultz just doing a better job than they were hoping he would do as an actor. But I just don't get the sense that they ever disavow that character enough. And I think this is like a moment of transgression. It's still represented as a moment of transgression that in the cold light of day he would never do. And I think...
No, okay, yeah, yeah.
Which is... But yeah, it comes dangerously close to saying Rambo is right.
It speaks to
Rambo
his line
is
from
right
earlier
about
that
violence.
we talked about. Yeah, it speaks to his earlier line, when you're pushed, killing is as easy as breathing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Does this
I don't
journey...
disagree. There's so many things, because I think there's an ultimate project here. I want to give it the benefit of the doubt, while also realizing that I get the sense that overall Stallone wants to de-romanticize violence and to a large extent say, pacifism is overall the right course, but there's so many caveats there
Right. I mean, there's so
Through,
many
I guess,
instances
now,
where they're
like lazy
he's saying the
thing-
direct opposite.
Yeah, it can get there, but
But do you think that's his intention overall? Is that the real world is as messy as the choices these characters are confronted with?
I
Is
certainly
it
think
just
that's
that
yeah.
the world's that complicated?
I'd like to think so. I think it is about. I mean, not just with politics and war, but also with the Rambo iconography. I think it is trying to throw a spanner in the works.
Hmm.
Like the Ram, it's kind of a sense that although Rambo 3 is obviously gloriously entertaining, and I don't think even Stallone would question that, he's just saying that, this might not be the right way to approach a war movie. Or at least we should look at some of the contradictions that might come out of that. Let's at least pay attention to them. But there's so many. I think there's so many different projects going on in this movie because that has to fight the fact that he needs to wind up. He needs to get Rambo in an emotional place where he's ready to go home.
Well, and that was my last thing. Is this story enough to send him home?
No.
Agreed. Yeah. So,
but
that's my last problem with this movie.
And you're absolutely right to draw attention to the fact that there's something dishonest about his interactions with Julie Benz, because I think they come from a part of the movie which is about she is his way of going home, story-wise.
Story-wise, I think that's totally the intention. Yes, but
she's also.
But I don't think it's earned.
But she's moonlighting also as the damsel in distress and the key to this whole Christ-like redemption narrative. Like this. Right. She's got a lot of hats to wear, but it just solely taken on. Why don't you go home and find out if anyone you know is still alive?
Still alive and would like to see you.
Is fine, like, especially given that it shows that for whatever reason he is no longer the stick fighting star he was in Thailand a couple of decades ago. Now he's been he's now been relegated to Cobra lackey.
Right.
So given all that, that trajectory makes sense, but everything that gets in the way makes it equally possible that he could just stay in that jungle and kill and wait there until another impassive
army of 200 people come.
Right. and what do you think of to me one of the biggest, most striking differences of this movie is what is our central villain in the movie, who we've become accustomed to in the previous two sequels, Russian villains who are chatty Cathy dolls.
Right.
They do nothing but talk, and we never hear a word from this guy.
And that's the thing is that
I originally thought, well, there's a vacuum there. There's like a villain vacuum there. But as the movie went on, I thought, no, I mean, it might not be as enjoyable as a Steven Berkoff.
Right. But I think
it's legitimate.
I wouldn't say that it doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You could say that about any aspect of this movie. I wouldn't say that it doesn't work. However, politics being what they are, we can't just let that pass.
Well, and that actor, I believe, was actually not an actor. I think I read somewhere that he was part of a village or something that was like rising up against these factions that were committing genocide in Burma, and he was really worried about taking the part because he thought it might cause harm to him and his family, but he decided to do it anyway.
Yeah, I think it's actually I mean, he gets dispensed with the same way that villains do in the movie.
It's pretty satisfying death.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Gets his guts ripped out.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know.
Much better than the next movie, by
homage
the
to
way.
Ramiro's Day of the Dead, apparently.
Yeah.
A Stallone the film fan coming back. But so I thought those kind of choices make me want to treat this movie more seriously, because it's like they've looked back and gone, how do we do things differently without compromising the overall Rambo formula?
No, yeah.
Like we need a villain, and we need a villain that is absurd in his villainy, but not played cartoonishly,
Yeah.
and not unnecessarily loquacious.
Not a
Steven.
problem in this movie.
Yeah.
Just have him not speak.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do you have anything else?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk a little bit about the ending of the movie.
Have we not?
Well, we've talked about how he goes home,
All right.
but the way that pans out, I think, is it comes out of nowhere, literally, like visually, it comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I think we do like an interfade on Rambo, and then the next time we see him, he's in Arizona.
Right.
So there's no like.
Well, he turns away. He's on top of the hill, and he turns away and walks off, like kind of. You
So
don't
there's
see
no
him go
shoe
over
leather
the hill,
there.
but you see him. He's about to leave the hill, and the next
There's-
thing you know, he's walking down a dirt road.
Yeah. And is this the first time we've found out that Rambo comes from farmers? From, like, a family of farmers?
I think it might have been referenced to. Like they say Arizona in earlier movies.
Yeah, oh,
But
Arizona, I know, but
But I
that
think
he's-
at some
he's a
point
farmer.
I remember hearing something about that it felt more rural.
Mm.
Yeah.
So there was
Could
that
be wrong.
Obviously, this is where we'll spend the next movie, this ranch.
Oh yeah.
But and I'm grateful they didn't forget that this was where the movie ended. In some ways, not completely, but it's better than forgetting that it happened.
Yeah.
But what we lose by picking up at this farm that we end up at in the next movie, we lose the beauty of it being an ambiguous ending. Like,
Yeah.
what's great about the ending is that shot, the wide angle.
Wide angle, he's walking up the
focus,
like you
long
see
take.
him walking up the whole road for the length of the entire credits.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a beautiful
I
shot, and the perfect shot to, of course, end the franchise.
To
which
end
he
a
did.
franchise, exactly.
It is, it's just this sense of like we don't know what comes next for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me, and it might even be a deliberate reference. I can't put anything past Stallone. The man knows, secret smart guy. He knows a lot, especially about movies. But it reminded me of the end of The Third Man, which is exactly the same.
Right.
Joseph Cotton, although it's Alida Valley who's walking past him, but this
I was
sense
just
of
watching
like,
that the other night.
it's like we don't know where this is gonna go from here. And you can still feel that he's acting in the shot, even when he's so far away.
Yeah.
Like he modulates the speed of his movement. I gotta say, one of those horses is a real ham. Really upstaging the other horses. But I just,
You're
it was,
being a dick, sugar.
Exactly. So it's again, it's the first shot of First Blood, but it just without over prescribing an ending for Rambo, it gives you his perfect out,
Right.
like his perfect exit. Except that the next movie sees that as an
A beginning, a new beginning.
an entirely new beginning, and just that's to me it's the most successful ending of any of these movies, because we talked about two or three, they kind of let the endings of the movie get away from them a little bit with Like, I mean, in part 2, it's
Well, in part 2,
Frank
you're like, where the fuck
Stallone.
is he going? You know?
Frank Stallone, the freeze frame,
Right.
and the jingoism. In 3, he ain't heavy, it's my brother. You're like,
It's
is
my
this
bro-
a love story between
Right.
two men? What
Yeah.
the hell? And this one is like strikes the perfect tone, and it uses music from the film. So there's no like additional bad pop track added onto it that will immediately date it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some notes on the credits, but what stands out to me in these credits?
Go ahead.
Stallone credits ask more questions than they answer.
Go on.
Security driver to Mr. Stallone. Okay. I'm interested in the use of Mr. Stallone. I'm not convinced that that's not Frank. And I have evidence when we get to Last Blood that supports that view, that this is Frank getting this driver, not Stallone.
All right.
But that's all, that's kind of all I had to say.
That's great.
But, I found it I found so many aspects of this to satisfyingly wind up.
To me, this is a...
Cross the T's, dot the I's.
Yeah.
Like, everything that you kind of wanted to come out about Rambo, even, as we've said, they don't successfully resolve what we're supposed to think about Rambo or what we're supposed to think about war or, what he represents. It at least puts out a lot out there that is food for thought.
No, I agree. I think the one thing that I find really interesting about this movie is, I mean, this would be a good movie for a film study class. Because there's enough in the movie itself to, like you and I are going, like go back and forth on and discuss and dissect. And so, kudos to the movie just for that. I think the movie's more interesting than it looks just on its face.
Yeah. But I think that, to me, that like this movie is impressive on the first viewing. On the second viewing, it begins to kind of reveal itself as a movie with significant problems, but also like a movie from 2008 made by the Weinstein Company. So, it's like, why are there so many British people in here? The motion sickness camera stuff that starts to come into play. So many production companies, you need to have a montage to cover it.
Yeah.
There are ways in which I could see a lot of people just thinking, well, this is just a bad afterthought, even compared to like Rocky Balboa, which I think the majority of people, even non-Stallone fans, were like, fair play, that's a good movie in and of itself. But the first impression for me is exactly the same as Rocky Balboa. It's like, this is someone who doesn't necessarily just want to rake over old ground for the sake of it.
No, yeah, I agree with that. Like I said, I think this would have to me I would describe it at least as an admirable effort towards closing out the series.
And I think it, in the past few months, we've seen the release of The Godfather Part 3 as The Godfather Coda. Which is, partly Francis Ford Coppola trying to counter the criticism of that movie by saying it was never intended as a sequel. It was intended as a wrap-up.
Yeah.
And that, to me, I don't think that's true, by the way. I think that's spin. There's no amount of editing that can hide the fact that that was intended to be as good as it could possibly be and just wasn't.
Yeah.
But here I feel like, Stallone could have claimed the same thing, that don't look at this as a Rambo sequel, look at it as
Closure to the series.
an epilogue.
Yeah, an epilogue, right.
And that's what it feels like. Of course, it's not. And we have to deal with that.
And we will in our next episode. So
But I'm not, like, I was very tempted to sort of take Last Blood into account more and say that, everything I like about this movie, well, almost everything I like about this movie is the fact that it's the last time you'll see this.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's not, I'm not going to hold against this movie.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Because that would definitely be a reason to say it's a bad film. As the third movie out of 4, it sucks.
Right.
But that's not this movie's fault. It is Stallone's fault, but it is not this movie's fault.
Yeah, I maybe that's, maybe I am blaming this movie a bit too much for what you're saying.
I think you're.
But
I think
I have problems beyond that. But
I think we're on either side of the Mexican border.
There you go.
Just to lead into the next one.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you have something to add about Rambo, please let us know. Find us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. Send us an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com and let us know. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you can. And we'll make sure to shout you out here on the show. So for Tom Stewart from Lonesome Whistle Productions, my name is Michael Shantz. I'm from the How Dare You Awards. We will see you next time for Rambo Last Blood. Say goodbye, Tom.
Fuck off.